Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked here on the channel. This is the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because it is a core facet of my identity at this point. My voice is husky, I'm recovering from a cough, but we're here, we're filming, we're ready to go. Today we're going to be talking about the books in Rachel Hartman's Seraphina series. Is that the actual name of the series? I assume it is. I have to hope so. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I bought every single book in this series myself, regardless of where books come from. Nobody's paying me to talk about books except my patrons, and all opinions are my own. I will keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible while still talking about all of the books. I'm not going to get into the plot for book 2 for that very specific reason, but if you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, pause the video. Come back when you've read them, we'll talk then. I'll link the story graph for the book down below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. I would say yes, especially for 3 and 4, probably. This is a set of young adult fantasy books written by American author Rachel Hartman. She's also interested in game design, if I'm remembering correctly. She's a writer and artist of comics. She likes role-playing games, which is where I've got that idea from, and she also plays the cello. Music, very significant, particularly to book 1. Seraphina, which I will stop holding up because I've just realised how horrible the glare is, but it is like a beautiful rainbow edition, so I feel bad hiding it from you. Seraphina came out in 2012. I really need to deal with this pile, but I'm not going to. Shadowscale is the sequel to Seraphina that came out in 2015. However, Seraphina very much stands on its own. You do not need to read Shadowscale. It's more of an additional book. You do need to have read Seraphina to read Shadowscale. Then, in 2018, Tess of the Road came out. This is a companion novel. It is set much later than the original 2 books. And then there is a sequel to that, which came out in 2022, which is In the Serpent's Wake. I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to count this as talking about all 4 of them for the sake of Overbooked. But I'm going to primarily focus on the original duology, because while I really love these books, don't get me wrong, I don't have as much to say about them. I'll come on to my full thoughts on them as we get towards the end. But know that I have read these, I do like them, I do love this world, and therefore I enjoyed them. But when I'm talking about whether or not you should read Seraphina, I mean Seraphina and Shadowscale predominantly. So, in these 2 books, we are in the Kingdom of Gored, which is a place that has a lot of religious overtones to its legal system, shall we say. We're following 16-year-old Seraphina, who is a court musician. She's living her life kind of trying not to be noticed despite her amazing musical talents. However, she is thrust into the centre of attention when she is part of the murder mystery plot of unravelling who killed the prince. It seems like he has been killed by a dragon, and with the anniversary of the tentative peace between humans and dragons coming up, it could mean very bad things if it turns out the dragons have done an act of war. But Seraphina has a little bit... I'm just going to check how much they reveal on the blurb about Seraphina's secret. Okay, it doesn't tell you what her secret is on the blurb, so I'm not going to tell you. However, there is a secret behind Seraphina's musical talent and her way of seeing the world, and it's definitely something that could get exposed if she keeps getting closer to the royal family. Reasons why you should read this book. The first thing I wrote down was religious trauma explored in a dragon book. While this is very much not a Christian world, we are dealing with the idea of saints who have got this kind of historic, there's a lot of text-based stuff, there's a lot of different saints, they all have different opinions on things, mostly they hate dragons. It's definitely allegorical, for sure, and I really like the way Rachel Hartman plays that out. It's not whacking you over the face with religious doctrine, it's just the world that Seraphina lives in, and the way that across both books that gets challenged, her cultural perceptions get widened, there's a lot of kind of internalised dragon phobia, I guess, if we're going the full way. I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting. I liked that the world felt really thought out. We don't see all of the religious stuff, but how often do you know everything about a religion just casually? So I really thought you got the sense that there is a well thought out religion and there's a lot of doctrine. Not all of it is given to you in the book. I appreciated it. I think also courts and politics and relationships between them, we see much more of that in Shadowscale. All of that detailed world building just is exactly the right amount of world building for this style of fantasy book, which I like. And the fact that it broadens out so much in book 2, really appreciated. We get to see much more of the world. It's one of my favourite things for fantasy series, particularly YA fantasy, to do is to give me a relatively small scope for book 1, just to get me in the world, get me to know what's important, and then show me more in book 2. I'm already on board with the characters, you don't need to do that work. Show me everything. Let us talk about Seraphina herself. I personally feel that Seraphina is a little bit neurodivergent coded. I don't know if that was intentional. I also don't know if someone else would read that the same way. It's obviously not trying to be representative of that, but certainly she is something of an outcast. She is a character that I think a lot of people could relate to. I really love her. I think We have a lot in common in a lot of ways. I'm not living in a fantasy world, but that's not my fault. One of the things I personally really like that we get to explore in book 1 is her coping mechanisms. Seraphina has an awful lot going on mentally for a number of reasons. There are spoilers because they haven't put them in the blurb. She has developed coping mechanisms for these things, and I thought it was actually really helpful to me, a person who also deals with some anxieties and so such. I liked the way that it talked about how she found a way around it. It's not about finding a cure for her, it's just about finding ways for her to work in the world. I liked that. She's also a very fun person to be in the perspective of, if that makes sense. The way she sees the world is interesting, her connections to things, the way in which the world around her has shaped her views and how she challenges those in later books, and her just desire to learn. I really like her. I fell for her the first time I read book 1. But Seraphina's not the only fantastic character, there's a whole number of them. She's teamed up with another royal in the murder mystery stuff that's going on. He's fantastic. There's a princess who's wonderful, and her character development is just so stunning across to book 2. We get to meet all sorts of new people, particularly in book 2, which is deeply exciting and also kind of sad. I really liked the way in which Rachel Hartman, given that this is over 10 years ago now, included a huge number of queer identities, particularly, again, in book 2, but in book 1 as well. I thought that was really interesting, and obviously she's writing in a world where a lot of that is not okay or is frowned upon, but she manages to do it in a way that that attitude is so negatively presented that it doesn't feel like a sad thing to read when you're reading it. It feels like more of a comment on perhaps how the Western world views things, and maybe religion has a lot to do with that, perhaps, maybe. Interesting. I first read Seraphina on a whim, a complete and utter whim. It was on my library's audiobook app, and I thought, it's got a dragon on the front, I'll go for it. And I ended up listening to it multiple times. I don't know if it was all in one go, and I just listened to it back to back a couple of times. I remember needing to listen to it more than once, because I just loved it so much. I really like the way that dragons are done in this, they're really interesting. So you'll have the full dragon form, which is a big dragon, obviously, and then dragons can also go into their Sarantras, which is a human form, but they are very different from humans in a lot of ways. And I thought that was really fascinating, and it's one of those things you kind of just have to explore, but there's a strong sense of dragons loving logic in a very specific way that I thought was interesting. So a lot of dragons are scholars, in particular mathematicians, and then the link in with music and maths, just yes to that. On the flip side, I think because I'm aware that I have a lot of nostalgia around this, I didn't read it that long ago in the grand scheme of things, but I still feel very nostalgic about it, and it feels like a nostalgic series to me. I do think that some elements of it, while they are in some ways ahead of their time in terms of representation, on the other hand, it sometimes feels a little bit like it's trying too hard, and that's such a delicate balance to strike, and it entirely depends on my mood when I'm reading them, how I feel about it. I think it is more subtle in Tess of the Road and in The Serpent's Wake, and you can actually see a lot how YA fiction in general has come on since then, but I remember being surprised by the representation in Seraphina and in Shadowscale in particular. So I think if you're reading a lot of young adult fiction now, it's not going to be as cool. But for me, very cool to see that represented back in whenever it was that I read these. I also think there's a really interesting cadence to the books in terms of kind of the pacing and the dialogue. A lot of things are people speaking in Goretti, but not as their first language, so some of it does come across quite stilted. I personally don't mind it. I think it feels very interesting as a book, particularly the plot difference between book 1, which has this very strong murder mystery element. Book 2 is a much slower burn as well, and much more gradually meeting new characters and doing things. I don't know, I think some people might not get on with it in terms of that slightly quirky pace and tone. For me personally, it works, possibly because I did it by audiobook first. Probably. So we come on to the question, do you need to read them all? Do you need to read all 4 of them? Because while they're not long, it is a commitment to 4 books. I would say read book 1 and 2. Read Seraphina first. If you don't like Seraphina, you won't like any of them. If you do like Seraphina, read Shadowscale, because it's great. If you are then done, you can be done there. You do not need to read Serpent's Wake and Tess of the Road. However, if you, like me, are really besotted with this world and you're interested in exploring it a little bit more through a very different story, I would say try Tess of the Road. In The Serpent's Wake is the weakest of all of them, in my opinion. I didn't like it as much. I don't really remember much about it. I will reread it at some point, but it's not completely sold for me. But Tess of the Road, I would say it's worth reading. For all of them, I would suggest looking at the content warnings before you do. Tess of the Road in particular deals with some very difficult topics. I would say anything that's dealing with like a very clearly Christian coded religion, in a kind of medieval period with queer characters is gonna hit some stuff for people that they don't enjoy. I would say overall the book feels very triumphant over that, but it's not a series where everything gets fixed by the end of the book. Other things you might want to read if you have liked these. I'm not going to talk about dragon books too much because I think I already have a couple of videos up for that, which I will link if I remember. Tonally, very interesting comparison. Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, which I read last year, I thought was fantastic and has a similar fish out of water kind of storyline to it that I appreciated. So I would say if you liked Thornhedge, you might like these. Uprooted by Naomi Novik comes up on lists where it's comparing these as well. I think it might be that just every book that came out during this period of time gets compared to Uprooted, but the comparison is there if you would like it. I don't think they're particularly similar. And the other YA dragon book that I've read is The Last Namsara, and I will link my video review for that because I think it's important that you watch that because there's 3 books in that series and you only need to read book 1. You absolutely don't need to read the other ones. In fact, I would argue you probably shouldn't. But I'll link that video, you can check that out, but that is a YA dragon book as well. Should you read Seraphina? My heart says yes. I love this story, I love Seraphina, I love these characters, I think it's really interesting. It is a book where I keep waiting for me to not like it, which is an interesting mood to be in, and an interesting state of play. Because every time I read it, I do like it, so why do I think that I'm not going to? Why do I feel like something will click and I'll go, oh, this book isn't actually very good? And I wonder if it's because I just don't hear anyone else talking about it. Or possibly it's that nostalgia lens, I don't know. But given that I've talked many times before on this channel about how many terrible dragon books from my youth I still hold dear to my heart, it would be disingenuous for me to say that I don't recommend these, because I do. Give Seraphina a go and see how you feel. Have you read these? Do you have plans to? Do you feel strongly differently to me? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also come hang out on Discord where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon and who've been very supportive while I've been a little bit sick lately. They support the channel and me, and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, live streams, and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Either there's gonna be no bloopers because I'm gonna be so frustrated at myself, or it will be all bloopers. There'll be like 5 minutes of bloopers left at the end of this video. I'm so sorry. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I bought every single book that you're gonna see on. These are books written by Rachel Hartman. These are young adult books written by. We follow 16-year-old Seraphina, who is a court magician. No, not a magician. No, my battery's dying. This is terrible. Okay, 2 seconds. If this video cuts dramatically and never gets posted, well, you won't know why, because it'll never get posted. But I might rage quit. I'm not prepared for this. This isn't going well.